By Foxfield
Yeah.
pool.
Their measuring tape must have been
There, we
misread.
used to know it not be lines, but I guess
This one's
lines are too thin. That's just gonna cause people to.
Things have come in and
Okay.
it's not always this way.
Okay, yeah. Things at home and I think I doubled up, but I think I got it straight.
Just shout if you don't know
This is
what
not-
page we're on or what.
Yeah.
We'll get you there.
Oh,
John, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Wow, I have a plethora of papers today.
Right. This is true.
you're good.
Maybe I need to scoot over a little.
Hello, everybody. It is 5:01. We're gonna start the May 11th meeting of the Lexington Planning Commission. We have full attendance today. First thing we'll do is call the meeting to order, and second item will be to discuss and approve the agenda. I know that John, were there items of other business you wanted to add to today?
If we could have a informal discussion on planning commissioners succession.
Okay. Yeah, if time permitting, in the other business, we'll add a very brief discussion on planning commission composition and succession. Any other items to amend, or are we ready to go? Oh, yeah. Actually, before we do any voting, I would like to welcome our newest member, Glady Hopkins. Welcome. Nice to have you. So, okay. With that said, agenda.
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. All right. Moving to the next item is approval of the minutes from April 27th meeting.
I always like the minutes, but it's someone else's turn to say it.
I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, moving to the next item, citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda. Don't see any. Okay. We are going to dive into our three items of new business. The first one is item A, zoning ordinance amendment 2023-02, an application by the city of Lexington to amend Article 4, zoning district regulations of the zoning ordinance to amend the lot width requirements for multifamily dwelling units. I will, before I let Arnie give us a primer, there are definitely some new documents that have appeared that we are seeing probably for the first time that pertain to this item. So we'll just keep that in mind. Arnie, what you got?
We have the great honor, I presume, to hold this public hearing again because I got ahead of myself with the public hearing that we held previously on lot width amendments for multifamily units, and then ended up taking the resolution to initiate the amendment to council. Because we were trying to get it done quickly, we ended up advertising the planning commission public hearing prior to the initiation, and our city attorney advised that we rehold this after the initiation. The amendment, the request to initiate the amendment was signed by council, so now we're having the public hearing for the lot width amendment. So that's just a little bit of history. I won't go over all of the issues. Your staff report is largely the same, even though in the last staff report, there were 3 potential resolutions to this, an A, B, and a C, or actually a 1, 2, and a 3. And instead of trying to keep up with what was recommended last time as options, and then the great solution that you all developed during the last meeting, I just sort of took credit for that to some degree in your staff report. And the staff recommendation now is to really approve what you recommended during your last meeting, which if I can flip over to page 9, which is page 3 of 6, to get rid of that 50 feet plus 10 feet for each unit above 4 requirement, where we're adding lot width based on the number of units, and just putting that as a substitution to that, just putting in a flat 100 feet. As you recall, that was really the resolution or recommendation that the planning commission came up during the last meeting, after we had provided with you all with a bit of additional information in the table that's now on pages 11 and 12 of your packet from some of our surrounding jurisdictions. So that's all I really have for a report or comments, and happy to answer any questions.
Arnie, are there any unintended consequences that we haven't thought of in terms of this 100-foot? Will it affect other? Will it, so just to confirm, it doesn't, it's strictly for multifamily.
Correct. This is a lot width requirement and a lot requirements table strictly for multifamily uses in both the RM and RLC zoning districts.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, if there's no other questions for Arnie, if we want to discuss some of the letters that were written, or have public comment now, what do you all want? Do you have more questions for Arnie before?
Well, I was wondering about, since I haven't had time to read the longer thing from Tom Contos, I was wondering if anyone has had a chance to read it and could kind of explain what it has to do with what we're talking about. And
Well, Tom's here. We'll let him speak during
Oh, there
public
you go.
comment.
okay,
Yeah, I'm not the city attorney, but I assume that if we approve our current, what we had sort of approved a few weeks ago, that it's not going to open up some sort of can of worms with retroactive changing of ordinances after certain properties have been approved for a certain thing. I assume that we're good.
I haven't run this by the city attorney specifically to answer that question, but I would point out, at least in my opinion, both of those developments met all the criteria for the conditional use, particularly the one, the Spotswood, I'll just say the Spotswood property. If you look at the conditional use criteria, it met those criteria. And that's the reason that it was approved largely here, but certainly at council. So I'm not aware that that I highly doubt that correcting something that may have been an issue, as we're being directed to do, or at least to look at by council, is going to cause any effect on previous approvals, which would now absolutely meet those requirements.
Any other questions from Arnie before we go to public comment?
Just out of curiosity, Arnie, would you go around and recommend to those who are now, if we pass this, are now, they didn't need the CUP because would you suggest to them that they go and resubmit their CUP and correct or modify it, or?
For the CUP, that's actually going to be a recommendation that might come up from council. From our city attorney. So and I'm getting ahead of myself here, but potentially, if the property purchaser is perhaps a little bit nervous about the succession of events or how this has been handled, and they would like to have that extra bit of comfort, they may request that we go back through that conditional use permit process now with this being addressed. But I'm not so sure that the city will on its own necessarily do that.
Uh,
Okay, let's open up public comment for this item. All right, feel free to come up, speak your name and address into the record, please.
Tom Contos, 301 McLaughlin Street. Yes, I apologize. I just sent these notes this morning, so it's fine if you haven't had time to read them. I don't think it's necessary. It's really just the last page, if you have a paper copy, that I wanted to kind of point your attention to. And that's not new information. That was just my attempt to reformat the existing zoning requirements into maybe an easier to read format, or a format that maybe kind of unpacks some of those formulas and helps you, I think, it's as a good tool to maybe better see the effect of changing lot requirements. So if you look at, for instance, the townhouse rows, under the previous city attorney, at that time, they were very strict in saying you had to meet each and every one of the lot requirements in each row. And then applicants were turned down if they, or they were told their lot was non-conforming if they failed to meet any one of those. Now, in the past year, we've received, I think, a new legal direction to the effect that the lot area and the lot width function in overlapping or conflicting ways, and that the applicant need meet only one of the two, one or the other. That's actually a pretty significant kind of change, kind of akin to the Supreme Court overturning a precedent. So it should be, I think, examined carefully in terms of after effects. So City Council, I think, asked you as a group to revamp the lot requirements based on that new interpretation, I think for two reasons. One is to make it absolutely clear that from their point of view, the lot width and the lot area represent a single function. So there isn't any confusion in future applications. And the second, I think, is to settle between the two of those on lot area rather than lot width as the determining factor. So currently we're saying that if you satisfy the lot width, you don't need to worry about the lot area, and vice versa, the either or scenario. So in that legal context, I think it makes sense to adopt one of two approaches. The first is to leave things as they are with the either or standard for lot area and lot width. And the second might be just to eliminate lot width requirements entirely. And I think my sense was that that's the approach that council wanted to endorse. What does not make sense to me, at least, is to reduce the lot width requirements instead of eliminating them. First of all, that approach carries forward the either or legal interpretation that we're operating under and that we just deemed confusing. If I meet the proposed, let's say you talked about a 100-foot lot requirement. Well, if I meet that for a multifamily project, then my lot size doesn't come into play and my unit count is unlimited. Now, if we change the lot width requirements to zero is still kind of a number. So, now I would say any lot area and any lot width can have unlimited units. Now that's not as crazy as it sounds, because obviously the physical constraints of setbacks, height limits, and parking would bring the development back into some hopefully more reasonable scope. Nevertheless, I think it would be better to eliminate lot widths entirely if you want to maintain the lot area as a standard. And I think the approach that has been, in my mind, taken off the table by the city attorney is the one that reverts to the now overturned interpretation that lot width and lot area are separate enforceable standards. So I think you were tending to go that way in your discussion about the 100-foot, saying the 100-foot now it's firm, but I think my understanding is that somebody can come back and say, I meet the lot area requirements, my lot width is 90 feet or 15 feet, which would allow a pipe stem lot, and that would be compliant. And then just two last quick points about this matrix. First, if the lot area and the lot width conflict in some rows, do they conflict in all the rows? Normally, when you see a matrix or a spreadsheet like this, you interpret them as being defined. the columns has been defined as serving the same function up and down the rows, including the uses of single family and non-residential. So that could potentially, I'm not saying it does, but it could potentially extend your decision into for instance, the residential suburban neighborhoods, or to non-residential neighborhoods. And then second, and this happens in the RLC zone that I live in, if my lot area is 7,500 square feet, why am I prohibited from building a single family house? I'm prohibited from building a duplex, but I can build a group of 3 townhouses. That's, maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I'm reading this. And I think if that's true, I think we got there by historically blending uses from the previously distinct R1 or RS zones and the RM zone, without taking maybe the time to coordinate across those uses. So, I just have a little bit of worry that a quick fix may not be the most prudent approach. I do think that the lot width requirements need to be updated and amended. And I think in the case of Spotswood, they clearly seem to be excessive. So I understand why you're doing this. But I would just urge a little bit of reflection and care if that's possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Tom, can I ask you a question? Going to your townhouse example,
Mhm.
7,500, therefore you can, according to lot area, you can put a 3-unit townhome on there or townhouse on there.
Mhm.
Is that unaffected? But you want to get rid of the lot width. How do those things conflict with each other? Is that what you're saying? Or is that if we got rid of the lot width, would that free you up?
I'm saying the lot area requirements, if we are focusing on those as a way of determining maybe the number of units permitted, you've somehow at some point in history, you've combined the requirements that you had for, let's say, the RS or the R1 zone with the RM zone. And so you go from requiring 12,000 square feet for a duplex to 7,200, as I understand it, for 3-plex, essentially. So I think that's just a little thing that needs to be, just an example. I think there are other things beyond, you're sort of very laser focused on the particular issue that's come up, but I think that there's maybe some other things that have accumulated over the years, and that a really thorough revamping of the lot requirements. I don't have an opinion on whether lot width or lot area, where they should be or where they should land. I'm not recommending, I just saying my understanding of what you were tasked to do from city council when they recommended 0. The reason I understood that to be eliminate them, but realize that if you try to set a different number, that it's not necessarily a firm number. Just as the old numbers were the 600 feet, well, the 100 foot may also be, in some cases, the lot, if you meet the lot area requirement, then that lot width requirement is not going to come into play. And I think that was the confusion that city council wanted to eliminate. So,
Thank you.
sorry.
So, Tom, in your opinion, if we got rid of, or if we had this 100 foot width minimum, what would be like the worst case scenario in your mind?
It's not necessarily a bad thing. I just wanted you to be aware that if someone came in and say with a pipe stem lot, saying my lot is 15 feet at the setback line, and then it expands and it's half an acre,
Mhm.
that lot then becomes compliant, and that,
Right.
so your 100 feet doesn't apply in that case. The 15 feet meets the standard.
Right.
So it's fine. I'm not opposed per se to the 100 feet, but I just remember that you're not doing it under the old system where we said these are firm numbers. You have to have 100 feet. You have to have 8,000 square feet.
Okay. And Arnie, are we actually, do we not have, are we not saying you have to have both 100, it has to be a minimum of 100 feet wide and a minimum lot size?
In the Spotswood issue, it was just an excessive amount and didn't
Sure.
make any true impact on that development. So there was not a determination by the city attorney that says it's now it's an or situation. It's in city council didn't say that they wanted 0. City council just wanted it to be addressed to look at the situation.
Right.
So now it would be both. So there
Right now
isn't
it
an
is
or.
both. So this was an exception. The Spotswood property was an exception to,
We have to remember, if you will, that is a conditional use permit. So in the conditional use permit, and it's a legislative decision, it's a legislative act, there is discretion allowed in the legislative act.
Mhm.
And in the conditional use permit, there are those 4 criteria. There's for the approval. And if they, as they did, decided that the proposal as it was before them met those criteria, they are allowed to approve it. And that's what happened.
sure.
So it's going to be an and not an or.
Yes, may I just say that I think that maybe the attorney needs to revisit that because I think it is true. And I think there was a case in 2020 which opened the door to saying that there can be a conditional rezoning, which can actually relieve some aspects of lot requirements as opposed to a variance, which is the normal way to do that. However, they can't be granted by inference. And I think in this case, it specifically was not requested and was not approved in that sense. I think, yeah, I think what was suggested earlier, I think that they could come back, redo the CUP, and they could, if that's their interpretation, they could then request as part of a conditional, zoning that happened. It would be kind of unusual. In the case that was approved, it was kind of a de minimis exception, but yeah. I don't think as it stands today that that's happened.
I'm not really big on this back and forth, but I will ask you, I don't understand what case you were talking about in 2020. What was,
Well, up until 2020, it was assumed that in conditional zoning, the conditions, or let's say the proffers that are made, are only to remedy negative impacts. So like we wouldn't rezone this, but if you do this, you can kind of cure those negative impacts. This was a case where somebody wanted to rezone a property. They didn't have there was a certain component of industrial use that was required in this mixed use zone. They didn't meet that. And the court said that in a conditional rezoning, it's possible to relax some of the zoning requirements without going to, say, a board of zoning appeals. So that's a very also big landmark decision. Hasn't been used much, but I think that it is an avenue for if Spotswood wants to come back. And I think if they have a lender, I think they would want to come back and simply clean that up from a legal point of view. That would be a much simpler solution. And then I think then you're going back to being able to say that you've got firm separate requirements. I think currently it's not being that standard. So I think this is maybe more of a legal question at this point than a question.
What's up, Arnie? You look like you want to.
There's a big distinction between conditional zoning and conditional use permits. So I don't know what this case is, and I'm not so sure that it's applicable here.
Okay.
That's absolutely true. A conditional use permit has conditions that are imposed by the city and conditional zoning, or there can be proffers that are made by the applicant. But I do, again, I'm not a lawyer either, but I talked to, my colleagues at Williams Mullen in Charlottesville that advise us on real estate matters at the foundation. And, this is the understanding I've come to. Again, I think it's a complex issue. I'm not trying to say this is the answer, but I would just say, go back to the city attorney and just clarify exactly what was the basis for the Spotswood approval in that case, and then where we are going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Any other public comment? No? Okay. I'm going to close public comment for this item of new business, and we can proceed with discussion and decisions on. I guess I'll just very quickly restate that I believe our intent when we approve this two meetings ago, was it 2 meetings ago, was we like the idea of there being two requirements for the most part, but that infinitely scaling the lot width based on the number of units just didn't seem to make sense, because and it was a unique situation Lexington had relative to our sort of neighboring jurisdictions and areas. So we're trying to sort of get to a position where there still are the two requirements, lot area and lot width, but just putting a finite, a discrete number on the lot width minimum for RM and RLC. So that's sort of what I want to frame the discussion. And I agree that it can open a big can of worms, and there's clearly room for the city to get on and revise lot area density and bringing it all into perfect concordance with each other. But I don't, the scope of this meeting is not to solve all the problems of density, but more just to look at this one issue, fix the sort of the scaling lot width requirements that are in RM and RLC.
Do you think as we look at this, you have to consider, we don't have too many new multifamily housing units. I mean, this is the first one I can think of in 20 years. We've had some revisions to other ones, but I can't think of one that was built in the last 20 years other than the proposed Spotswood. I do like the idea of having a lot width just to prevent the pipe stem situation. That's something we're, going to talk about in the future and have had little discussions for housing as it is. Is that acceptable? At this point, I worry about allowing that for a multifamily, for a big development. And granted, this can only happen in two zones, RLC and RM, but it's the RLC I get worried about. If somebody has a large lot off the street and they can now suddenly build a fairly big complex behind some other possibly housing, that's a different situation, I think, than having street front access. So I actually like what we came up with last time.
Not to interject, but does everybody understand what a pipe stem? We throw out the terms flag lot and pipe stem. I think we covered it maybe quickly, but it's a lot that would be very narrow at the front where you come off the street, maybe just have a driveway, and then it gets bigger towards the back. And most of the development would be on that back portion.
Is that type of lot, is that allowed in other residential areas like R1, R2?
I'm going to paraphrase a little bit from our zoning or subdivision code. You're not allowed to create a pipe stem lot. You're
Okay.
not allowed to make the borders in such a way that you're just increasing a portion of the lot to meet lot requirements and have a very narrow frontage. But if we have an existing pipe stem lot, a lot of record that existed prior to the zoning or even the subdivision requirements coming into place, then it could still be built upon. But it is generally frowned upon. Create such a lot.
Why is it frowned upon? I'm kind of
I'm-
intrigued by
Me too.
this concept, because you have some property that has a narrow front and a deep back that's RLC and that has real potential to develop. And maybe as Tom pointed out, that it has plenty of area. It just has a narrow front. I mean, they still within the front, they're still going to have to meet certain setback requirements, but the 100 feet is, I wonder why are we so, I just don't know. Why are we so concerned about allowing pipe stem?
Just as an example, if you think of more of a typical subdivision, residential subdivision, 50-foot wide front lots, 100-foot, whatever the lot size or lot width would be, you want a fairly uniform look along the street. So you wouldn't necessarily want to have lot, and then two pipe stems going behind it. And it would be a really strange configuration. So it's been traditionally more acceptable to have lots with regular frontage along the street and not have some with regular frontage and then some with really small frontage with the access to the back. So it's just better to provide all lots with relatively the same amount of frontage. You know, we're in a built out situation. All of our lots pretty much exist. There is not too much opportunity for us to subdivide. So we will have to just deal with the lots that we currently have, or however they're amended through the subdivision process, which is primarily a public hearing process. But just generally speaking, if you're laying out greenfield development, you really don't want to have odd shaped lots just for consistency.
But isn't that in terms of increasing available housing? Doesn't it make sense that, yeah, we'd like to have consistency in some level, but doesn't it make sense that perhaps we are limiting the amount of affordable housing or any kind of housing we have if there are and I don't know, these lots may not exist in RLC. But I'm just wondering.
I don't think it's going to have any impact on us. To mention one other thing that the comprehensive plan directs us to do is to look at family subdivisions, and that's basically a pipe stem lot. So there are in particular a number of deep lots off of Thornhill. And as we were coming through the comprehensive plan amendment, where we looked at the whole comprehensive plan, where we're coming up with a number of different tools to increase affordability and number of units in particular. What we're doing now with accessory dwelling units, or what we're going to do with cottage housing. And then one we haven't really addressed was this idea of adding a unit or so behind an existing house, so that you could have sort of a family subdivision, is what they're called in a lot of the county codes. So we will still have the ability to add maybe a handful of those types on what really ends up being a pipe stem type lot in the future. But I really don't see it having much of an impact in RM or RLC currently, the way our lots are laid out and where those properties are rezoned RM and RLC.
But just because we can't anticipate it being a problem, should we constrain it from possibly becoming an opportunity by putting this restriction on the lot width? I don't know. I'm not advocating for one or the other.
So one thing that I think you might think about is what it would look like in practice. So my backyard, let's say that there was a house in let's say I was able to subdivide behind the garage, and that whole backyard becomes a lot in and of itself. So you have to get electricity out there, you have to get plumbing out there, you have to get wires, and then there's a question about, so all the utilities and public services, and then you've got people who are living back in the backyard surrounded by other people's backyard. So it sort of creates I think I'm not sure that there's there might be a safety component, but probably not that. I mean, it just feels like it's not what certainly I ever learned was sort of a traditional town plan. And I think a lot of these streets, in Lexington have alleys, and maybe some of these really long lots were supposed to have alleys and didn't, for example, Jefferson Street, where between whatever that is, Preston and White, where you've got super long lots where there should have been an alley that provided, access back there. Anyway, I just, there are a lot of town planning considerations when you're talking about creating lots of different, a little warren of here's a driveway that goes way back here, and there's a house back there, and then there's another house back there, and I hear you. I just there are sort of more traditional planning.
So I agree with Matt and with both of you, and I can think of many reasons why it wouldn't work, but I could think of, you might have a situation, and we never know, and we end up zoning for trying to get this right for every situation that we can't anticipate. But the question I have to Arnie about that is, if someone did come forward with we had a pipe stem lot and came forward, could it be done under a conditional use permit?
I'm not sure if you're asking whether or not we are creating a pipe stem lot under a conditional use
Well,
permit,
let's start with it's existing.
then you wouldn't need a conditional use permit. It's a pipe stem lot and it met the 100-foot requirement,
But it
presuming
doesn't,
that
in
goes
this case, it
forward.
doesn't meet the 100 feet. It's a 50-foot driveway going back. Then you would say no. Okay.
Correct.
Well, this is one reason why, when we had the considerable debate the last time about this, we said that we would come back and look at some of these issues later. Because I think there are unintended consequences that we don't have, that, you know, it's not on the agenda. And I thank Tom for writing out what he's done. And when you have a chance to look at it, you can see how, and he's clearly telling us that some of these decisions we make have a impact on the character of the neighborhood and how the built environment meets the public environment and what it feels like. So I think we might need to come back to this, and that's why also we've had some discussions. I know we got into the wording about density, but I think we're also talking here about quality of space and open space, which is something Arnie has brought up. So I'm okay with going with what we have now but I would still like to say that this takes more of a precedent, not a precedent, but a priority in our annual zoning amendments.
So when you say you're okay with going with what we
The
have now,
100
you
foot.
mean no change, or do you mean the 100 foot?
The 100 foot.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, but even just within, I'm looking at page 9 or 3 of 6 in the packet, this one that looks. And even just this section that is under RM, where you've got a 60-foot lot width for a single house, or two family dwelling is 80 feet. Townhouses are 20 feet each, so you could technically have one townhouse and have it be only 20 feet wide, except that you have 10 feet on either side for a side yard. So, you know, it just feels very random, these numbers. And so I just feel like it certainly would call for a larger conversation, but I'm agreeing with you about the 100 feet for now.
I tend to agree with what they were saying. I don't think we have, or I certainly haven't come to grips with the purpose, the zoning purpose of putting the width requirement there. So I feel like this would be like a placeholder sort of thing. And I still think that if it comes down to a conditional use permit in one of these areas, it's can still be treated as an either or, just as the Spotswood property was treated as an either or. And I don't like from there's nothing in it, unless we say explicitly it has to be both, then clearly on the precedent of Spotswood, we can do an either or. And that's you know, based on the other considerations of a conditional use permit. So, I mean, if we do it this way, we're kind of, as Tom was saying, I think that if we make it 100 feet, it's still either or, because it doesn't say it has to be both, and it was treated before as an either or. And reasons were found to say, well, the width doesn't hurt anybody or hurt anything if we ignore that one. So I don't know if we're really actually doing too much here with this. So that's why I'm okay going forward, because I think that's what we're doing. So
Sorry, so you're okay with
I'm okay, because I don't think at this point it makes a difference, because I think it's still an either or, because that's how it was read before. In terms of conditional use permit, I guess if it's not a conditional use permit, then it has to be both, I guess, right? The only reason you could ignore one is that it was a conditional use permit. So if it's a conditional use permit, then it's still going to be either or. And if it's not, then we got the 100 feet in there, and okay. And probably for most developments, it's going to meet that anyway, if you're looking for something big enough. I do think that a lot of, if there is going to be infill development, it's going to, because of the way our town is weirdly laid out, it's going to be through the pipe stem things where because we have spaces behind properties that are hard to get to, and might have to be a creation of it. I mean, Shannon, your property, that Brubaker Annex was part of your property, and it was like, well, there's no way to develop that that several acre lot, like,
Right.
to sell it off, and ultimately, it's been put to very good use. But I think there probably was a lot of thought of, can we develop this? And there's no way, to get in there, and it would require getting some house and taking it out, and like, so, but I think we might run into that issue where someone wants to develop that back there. So I'm okay going with what we decided at the last meeting about this.
I do think we need some clarity on, doesn't have to be tonight, on this either or situation.
Well, I think we have it. I mean, I think,
Yeah, I mean, it's just from what it sounds like is it's either or when it's a conditional
Yeah.
use permit. Because then.
Okay.
That's my best interpretation.
which I think it's probably an interesting legal question to say whether, even though it's a legislative act and a conditional use permit, whether you can ignore established zoning. Established zoning is established zoning, and that was a legislative act to create that. So I think it's a complex legal thing that it's above, I think, all of our heads.
So Arnie, when do you advise people that it's either or when they come in, if they're doing a conditional use permit, or how do you handle that with someone who's bringing a plan forward?
We show them what the requirements are, tell them what the requirements are, and they submit a proposal. How many multifamily have we had in the 7 years that I've been here? I think I can really only recall 2. And even with the one that for the Spotswood, that was made clear to them in the proposal process, because I wrote up a report for council at that time saying what the requirements are for multifamily for that property. So they were aware when they put the proposal in, and so was the other group, that we had both of these requirements. I've never mentioned anybody that it's an or requirement. I'll say it that way.
Okay, anybody have any other things they'd like to add, or?
Well, just one thing that's where as I've noted earlier, I mean, the information Arnie provides is critical to both council and the potential developer. And in this case, it's mixed because the council is a kind of a co-developer. So, but the safest thing in this is predictability. And that's what I think, if we come back to this, and I think we should, that we create some clarity around it. So, because then it's not ambiguous, unless you want it to be that way. But that's why we have a planned unit zoning to allow that flexibility and discussion. So,
Yeah, I don't think anybody in planning commission is trying to let people know that the zoning ordinances are just completely flexible and you can bend them to whatever you want. I think that's if there was any sort of ambiguity in the last case that we dealt with, it was because it was a conditional use permit, which
Right.
Yeah, anyways, so I agree. I think a very holistic approach to discussing all of this is definitely warranted. But let's go ahead and enough people have chimed in that they're okay with this sort of quote unquote placeholder of changing it to 100 feet lot width minimum for RM RLC. So if we have a suggestion motion for that, we can vote yay or nay on that, unless there's some radical new thing that you all want to discuss.
Go ahead.
Can I make a motion? Yeah. I move to amend zoning ordinance amendment 2023-02 to amend Article 4, Section 6, lot requirements such that the minimum lot width requirement for multifamily dwelling units in the RM and RLC zoning districts is 100 feet.
Second,
100 feet minimum. Is that, or it's
Um,
100 feet?
That the minimum lot width requirement is
Minimum lot.
100 feet.
Okay,
Is that okay, Matt?
Yeah. Yeah. Trying to think about that, yeah.
okay. Any further discussion on this, on the motion? All in favor?
I,
Aye. Okay. Just waiting for somebody to chime in the last minute. Nobody did. Okay. All right. So that motion passes. And again, for the record, I do think it would be good to look at this big picture of all of these lot area and lot width requirements, and that would be a prudent thing for the city to do. Okay. Moving on to item B of new business is amendments to the bylaws of the Lexington Planning Commission. So Arnie will give us a brief rundown of the amendments proposed, and looks like there's also further discussion on possible other amendments at a later date.
If I could direct your attention to the handout that you received this evening, it is the one with the bylaws of the Lexington Planning Commission. It has some highlighted text on the front page and also some blue text. Something that you'd have on your desks with the paper clip on it.
Yep.
It is a little bit different than what is in your packet. I'm going to sort of go through an order as the recommendations were made. So if you don't mind flipping over to page 3. And I'll hold up until everybody gets there. And page 3 has purple text, if that helps.
that's on it.
do you have an extra one? Gladys doesn't have a handout one.
I prefer the numbering to be different on the top of the page from the bottom of the page. It's really hard to figure out where we are. Just have the right page number.
Luckily, this is the one without numbers at the top.
Right.
So just the ones with
Yeah.
bottom numbers. So if everybody's on page 3 again with the purple text. Direction from the city attorney, because there was some changes made to the Conflicts of Interest Act and the city's portion of that. So in conformance with state code, the recommendation is to change the language around so it reads all members. And just for everybody else, this is the bylaws of the Planning Commission, sorry. All members must comply with the Virginia State and Local Government Conflict of Interest Act, Virginia Code Section 2.2 3100. If the chairperson is disqualified by reason of conflict of interest, the vice chairperson will preside. If the vice chairperson is also disqualified, a majority of the remaining members will designate a chairperson to preside. And that's the end of that section. Also on your desks, there is a copy of the Lexington City Council Code of Ethics and Conduct, just for your,
Same paperclip.
Gotcha.
we don't have to go over that now, but it's just for your reading later. So that's the first. If you have any questions, if you want to take these piece by piece, or would you like for me to continue?
Go on.
If there are no questions, then the second one, if we'll flip over to page 4, because of training that I received years ago about parliamentary procedure, there was a recommendation that we specify which Robert's Rules of Order, if we're going to use Robert's Rules of Order, that we specify which one so that folks are aware. You know, there's regular Robert's Rules of Order, which is on the order of 500 or 600 page document. And Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And then there's the short version, which is the Robert's Rules of Order newly revised and brief. And that's the one we carry with us in case there are questions, but we have a parliamentarian so that we don't have to actually pull out the book. So we're always grateful for that part. So that's just a recommendation that we actually specify which Robert's Rules of Order we use for parliamentary procedure.
Sounds good.
And then going back to the first page, John had submitted some recommendations and he's correct on the purpose section, A, B, and C. Those section numbers or chapter references were just out of date. Instead of in A, it being in chapter 22, the subdivision ordinance is actually chapter 360 now. In B, chapter 28 is no longer the zoning ordinance, it is now 420. And this comprehensive plan section for the planning commission is in the city code in 10-7. And then I'll go ahead and let John finish up with the sort of text, additional text that's in blue there as his recommendations.
Thank you, Arnie. In reading those more closely, and I realized that it just says the preparation of recommendations to city council with regard to approval or disapproval of subdivision. Doesn't say anything about the fact that the commission would be making amendments to the existing ordinance. And the same with the zoning ordinance. It's just that you are approving or disapproving rezoning and conditional use applications, but you're not really, as a commission under here, empowered to make amendments to the existing ordinances. So that just, those are tweaks. And under the maintenance of the comprehensive plan, I was looking at a previous annual report, that a draft that Arnie had put together, and suggested, I think we do more than maintenance of the comprehensive plan. I think that's rather outdated. And in fact, when you compare the comprehensive plan that most everyone here worked on, it's far advanced from the earlier one. So in a way, the language hasn't caught up with the new comp plan. So and so the recommendation there, and we can tweak it, is to make recommendations to city council on revisions, updates, and adoption of the comprehensive plan in accordance with, and Arnie, I put cite the proper reference, which I guess would be 10-7. And consider and advise city council on relevant planning issues regarding the development of the city noted within the comprehensive plan. And the reason I suggest that is, well, aside from my own practice over the years, I remember what Mike Chandler said to us in the planning commissioner course. If you're just doing zoning, you're not doing planning. And in a way, I think it would be nice to say that the planning commission actually is involved in planning, and that is through the comprehensive plan. And so that's why I recommend some language to that effect in here. And it could be even simplified, to consider and advise the city council on relevant planning issues as noted within the comprehensive plan. It can be simplified. We have wordsmiths here. But
So thank you, John. Those are it's great to highlight these. I'm curious if the words administration in sections A and B and the word maintenance in section C, if those mean exact like what's already what you have amended in blue. Like, does the word administration also mean amending, being the administrator of something? No.
well, if not necessarily, because then it's modified by the sentence, which says it's only approval or disapproval of applications.
Okay.
What is the procedure now for planning commission to initiate a zoning amendment?
I think it says by motion of the planning commission or initiation by resolution of council. But let me find that.
The planning commission already has that authority to initiate an amendment.
I remember we We talked about it last meeting. Aren't there 3 conditions that council requests? The commission initiates. It may need approval of the council, and then the third one is a citizen request comes in.
Reading from the amendment section of the zoning ordinance, which is 17.2, sorry, 420-17.2 amendments, procedures, subsection A, and then subsection 2 under that pursuant to Code of Virginia, section 15.2-2286.7. Any amendment to this chapter may be initiated by, and there are 3 of these. First, resolution of the city council. Second is a resolution of the planning commission or a petition of the owner, contract purchaser with the owner's written consent or the owner's agent thereof of the property, and it goes on. If I could also point out a couple of things, I would not recommend in favor of the amendments as proposed for a couple of reasons. And first is if we go into subsection A for the subdivision ordinance, the way the subdivision ordinance reads in its amendment section, it says that any regulation or provision of this chapter may be amended from time to time by the city council in accordance with 3 different sections of state code. It does not specifically say that the planning commission can start an amendment. And then the reason we provided you with Article 1, Planning Commission, this other 2-page document, 1 page front to back, is this is really where your marching orders come from. And this is in the front section of the city code. So in here, it says your powers and duties. I'm reading from 10-6 on the bottom of page 1. The city planning commission shall have the functions, powers, and duties which are prescribed by law. And then 10-7, specific to the comprehensive plan, it gives you A through D, and even D has 8 subsections. So this is really what provides you with your direction from council. And if you want to go ahead and parrot all that or just simply references, because right now in subsection C it says maintenance of the comprehensive plan in accordance with section 10-7 of the city code. So I'm not sure necessarily why you need to restate that or state it differently, and hopefully not add anything other than what's already been assigned to you as tasks.
If that was the case, and going back to Blake's point, then you would leave the language could even be shorter and say administration of the subdivision in accordance with chapter 360 of the city code, period.
Right.
Administration of the zoning ordinance according to blah, 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 woof, woof, and then maintenance of the comprehensive plan or administration of the comprehensive plan in accordance with section 10.7 of the city code. And just make it, didn't take the rest out and make them consistent. So either there is a description in there that reflects what you want the commission to be doing, or you take it all out.
I would agree with that.
And you know, I looked today, I didn't have time to do a thorough, but you look at other jurisdictions and they can, even big ones can be short and sweet. So, and then some are much more declarative as to the role of the commission. So, I mean, Prince William Board of County Supervisors has a host of purpose and objectives. The Isle of Wight basically summarizes chapter 22, article 1, section of it summarizes what Arnie handed out in terms of this, the role of the commission. And James County, the commission shall be responsible for making recommendations to the board on all phases of county planning, including a comprehensive plan, long-range planning, zoning, and subdivision regulations. So I would be an advocate for putting the word planning in there somewhere. But if and or just revise it and just keep it to the city code. Period.
For all 3 of them, you mean?
Yeah, I guess I would disagree. I like the I would keep it as it already is. I mean, I think it is helpful to have the extra phrase at the end. B, I'm actually okay with adding the and amendments to the existing ordinance. If, so we can initiate that and then it doesn't have to go through council to get a second approval. It's not a recommendation. If we decide to do, is it a recommendation to council that we do it, or we can just start doing it?
I think you just start doing it. and we've
Yeah,
done
so
that
I
in the
wouldn't mind
past that way.
keeping that. And then C, I would not add that.
With under C, your recommendation for the make recommendation to city council on revisions, update and adoption of the comprehensive plan, which is what we're required to do anyway, at least
Right.
every 5 years, right?
Yep.
And then looking at Article 10D under duties and powers, we'll have the functions, powers and duties which are prescribed by law. So I guess part of the question is, what are the functions, powers and duties that are prescribed by law? And would those cover the consider and advise city council on relevant planning issues regarding the development of the city? Noted. In other words, are we allowed to do that by law anyway? Right, that's, so in other words, is that necessary? Again, if we're talking about paring back what's here, because why do we have to put more than we need to? Are we allowed by law to consider and advise city council on relevant planning issues regarding the development of the city? That's
This
what
came in late, so I didn't have a chance to provide you with all the
Yeah.
2286 of the code, and we can certainly do that if you'd like that for the next meeting.
And by law, do we mean city law, state law, county law?
state law. I imagine that's what that means, right? State law. So and that's the question, John, I have is are we already? Is the question, we don't want to put that in because are we not allowed to consider and advise city council on relevant planning issues? Or
I think there's, based on my quick research today, Pat, and it's not, it deserves more. If this is something we want to think about for the future, more research and by Arnie and others. If I remember under you looking at this, which Arnie handed to Article 1 Planning Commission, there's an extensive section 10.7 has a lot on the commission plan. This is more for the development of the comprehensive plan. It speaks more to that. So I think it's a value statement. If you want, these other examples I cited make the point that the commission is also involved in providing advice to the city council on planning issues. And if the commission isn't doing that, then who else is going to do it?
I think the question is, my question then is, does that last part, the second half of the consider and advise city council on relevant planning, right? The question then would be, if we are by law, if we have the function, power, or duty prescribed by law to do that, then would that be then subsection D?
I don't have the final answer.
Right, but
for you.
if it is, so it's answering the affirmative hypothetically, then that would be subsection D rather than under comprehensive plan.
I have a feeling that it's not required,
Right,
so that it's more of a statement that that's what you would like the
right.
planning commission to be
And
doing.
this, if it's a question of kind of a value statement or
It's a value
under
statement.
purpose, then
Yeah.
does it belong in our bylaws, and would we need city council to sign off on that then?
Well, yes, of course. When you look at more detail on the planning commission role, there's an extensive section in there on transportation planning, on affordable housing, that it's not clear whether the commission is responsible for just developing the plan or is responsible for kind of monitoring it. So I think what I would recommend for today is, if you want to go ahead and do the other amendments on conflict of interest, and then and the first two, and then on this maintenance of the comprehensive plan, we could come back to it in the future with a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I think it has to be something that the council has to be comfortable with.
I mean, I agree with you in terms of what your intent on what you're trying to say here. I'm just thinking, where does it belong? Where would it belong in the bylaws, and what would it fall under? And does it, you know,
Well,
is it allowed? Or,
well,
It's
yeah,
important to-
there's lots of other examples of where it's allowed.
Yeah.
It's a statement by
right,
by the municipality that it values planning.
Right. so for me, it's a question of just where does it go in here, to my mind. In other words, I agree with you in the substance. I just wondering where we would put it, because I don't know if it falls under comprehensive plan, because I think that is already taken care of by what's here. Yeah.
Okay, I haven't had the time. This is a suggestion I had to strengthen that on. And then to me, the logic was it made sense to do it under the comprehensive plan subsection of this.
So
Other thoughts among anybody on this? Shannon?
I think we need more information. I think we should come back to, certainly to section C. After we get some more information about what is in the law and the code. Now, Leslie, you said that you were okay with the suggestion in section B,
Mhm.
and then in section A, you wanted to stop it at city code. Is that right? Or did I misunderstand?
At how it currently is, so a period after applications.
And can you just explain? So I don't know if this is you or Arnie. Are we not allowed to make amendments to the existing subdivision ordinances right now?
My opinion is if council asks you to review something, yes, but right now in the subdivision code that I read, it is not written that you have the ability to initiate an amendment to the
Okay.
subdivision code.
Any sense of why we would be allowed to do that with the zoning ordinance, but not with the subdivision ordinances?
I don't have that history. I don't know.
That seems sort of random. So could we go ahead and add the text to B and then take the other two up after maybe you could find out some more information about the history. I don't know if that's possible about section A.
I presume it's going to be next to impossible to figure out. We'll find
Yeah.
when it happened and what the text was, but the intent of that
Yeah,
is going to be.
it's just not
impossible.
clear to me why you would have one be,
But
Okay.
maybe
And not the
if I
other.
state it this way, if you do put it here, that's not going to give you the ability to initiate until we go back and
Yeah.
address it in the subdivision ordinance. So now
Right.
right,
when we're
exactly. I mean,
trying
we
to
could,
address something in, now we're going back revisiting a lot more things, and I'm not sure that that was the intent behind all of this. So we're already talking about more research and two different items, and we're really trying to clean up something that has to do with certain conflicts of interest. But with your direction, I'm certainly willing to do more research, but I'm not so sure we're going to find out what the intent when the subdivision code was adopted, why planning commission was left out of the ability to initiate an amendment.
It doesn't presume if you left it amendments to the existing ordinance, it just means that it's part of your job and it's initiated through council. That's all. And the same with the amendments to the existing ordinance, which is, there's three ways that those amendments can be initiated, and we're one, and we are the ones who end up doing the amendments. So I was in those two small little insertions, I was just trying to suggest that the commission does more than approve and disapprove subdivision applications. It's also supposed to amend.
But we can't initiate that. And I think it reads as though we have the ability to initiate it. And that's why I would not put that in there. I mean, and on C, if you wanted to stop C after cite the proper reference period, I mean, our job is to make recommendations on the revision update and adoption of the comp plan. But all that other, that's a big that's a big change, and it's fine to do when council asks for it. But by having it on its own, it looks like we can take that up on our own and do it. And that's probably a big waste of time unless we have that conversation with council and they tell us that they want.
I
that.
agree that it's a major shift in approach,
Mhm.
to say the least, from existing practice.
I don't think with the addition of that, I actually thinking about it, I don't think it does say that we have the power to initiate because we don't. Because it's
For the subdivision?
in preparation of recommendations to city council with regard to approval or disapproval of subdivision applications, which we don't initiate. And preparation of recommendations to city council with regard to amendments to the existing ordinance. Right, so that would just mean if one comes to us, we prepare a recommendation about an amendment.
Yeah, that's how I read it.
I think that's so. I don't think that's saying that we are taking the ability to initiate that. We're just saying that we prepare recommendations to city council about amendments to the existing. So if someone comes to us with it, that's what we do. So I don't think. You know what I'm saying? I don't think
I
this,
see what you're saying, but I think that's, I think it's,
I mean, is it just implied? Is it just
vague.
obvious? Is it implied? Is that blue
Okay.
part already like obvious and we don't need it? Or is that
Well, but we
Is that
have
what you're
the
saying?
other part,
right? So
so. Going back to the ending at city code.
I think it gets a little confusing because with the others, with the approval or disapproval of applications, that comes to us first. So we start off the process and then it goes to council. So by adding the amendments in there, I don't want that to be interpreted as we start that process because we can't start that process for the subdivision.
We can just add an amendments to the existing ordinances as initiated by the city council.
Yeah, I enjoy this discussion because I've changed my mind 20 different times as you've talked. And now I'm actually settling back on the more minimalistic approach of literally just saying we can do what's in the city code. And like, why do we have to fluff it up? This is this is like the most boring legal document that our commission is here. These are the powers that are given to us. Like, we don't need to create special roles for us. Like we're doing what is given to us by the city code. Like we can amend the city code, but we don't need to amend the bylaw. Like that's where I'm falling at. But you guys have made amazing points that I completely agree with. We're very important planning commissioners. We do so much more. We add so much more value than our bylaws state, but we don't need to have their bylaws define who we are as a planning commission. Like that's where I'm falling at. And I agree though, like we provide a lot of value and we have taken a better proactive approach to administering and maintaining the comprehensive plan than any previous planning commissioners ever have. But these are the bylaws and I don't know. That's where I'm falling at.
That's it. You made a very good argument and I'm fine with that proposal.
I like.
You'll excuse me all. I had told Arnie that I had a prior engagement. I didn't know I was going to be appointed to this. So I have to leave. I'm sorry, but it's
Okay,
been
no, thank you.
interesting and I'll
We
get,
hope we didn't scare you away.
actually no.
Unfortunately, we do this a lot. We like to get into the details.
Every word.
It's
all
interesting.
frustrated lawyers want to be lawyers.
I see John's concerns. He's trying to establish a culture as written into the bylaws that we have come to kind of organically over the course of the last several years. And my concern is trying that I want to give as much flexibility to any future planning commission to be whoever they want to be and not.
This is definitely for future planning commissioners. It's not for us. We're not going to be around, this is, so are we, since I started this, can I kind of get us to a solution? I think if we go with a minimalist approach, as Blake put out, then we ended at at the end of this city code.
Yep.
Yeah.
And leave it at that
For all three of them.
for all three of them. Either you add a descriptor or you take them out.
Again, where is the harm in making no amendments whatsoever?
The maintenance of the comprehensive plan is a pretty lame statement that comes out of the,
But it still references the city code in accordance with the city codes and each of the sections that already exist. So like by just literally not stripping any of the text out, we haven't stripped ourselves of any powers. We haven't given ourselves any powers. We're literally just status quo. I mean, like, I'm fine. We can just like put red pen through the entire document, but
no, that wasn't that. And I actually, when I sat down to do this yesterday, I tried to come up with the smallest amendment possible. But again, just the consistency. So, and we've had these debates before.
Yeah.
Either you have a descriptor you have a description in the first A and B. And it's not entirely accurate as to what we do.
Mhm.
And I've added a description for C, which I can understand that the last sentence after and is a bit of a stretch. So it could end with make recommendations to city council on revisions, updates and adoption of the comprehensive plan according to section 10.7 of the city code. That reflects this article.
So you're just wanting to get to a consistent
Yeah.
format.
Yeah.
Which I think does make sense. It's not a huge
Yeah.
change, right? Either that or go or just take out everything after city code for all.
Yeah, for all
For
of
the
them.
first two.
How does this affect you? I mean, I mean, in
His
terms of
ability to get
clar-
home
is-
for dinner.
Well,
today.
in terms of clarity, does this have an impact in terms of administratively for you?
No, and my only concern is really where we're potentially either confusing the language or what's really allowed, or when we're overreaching what's actually in the code. So those are my only concerns, not so much in administration necessarily.
So taking the extra language out after city code is not going to impact you.
Correct,
Correct.
because your marching orders really come from other locations, and
So-
particularly in Article 1.
Here's what I recommend. We clean up the numbers. The chapter numbers have to be fixed, right? And I would say for under A, where the blue starts, I would make it, and with regard to applications for amendments to the existing ordinance. And that would be consistent with the first half of the sentence. So you'd have two with regards to preparation of recommendations to city council with regard to approval or disapproval of subdivision applications and with regards to applications for amendments to the existing ordinance. And that makes it clear that the applications are coming to us and we make a recommendation on it. And then I would recommend we keep under B, keep the blue. I think everybody was okay with that. And under C, put a period after cite the proper reference. And then that gives the consistency that John's looking for between the three subdivisions, each having the briefest possible description and leaving aside the rest of that. How's that sound?
Works for
good.
me.
Good for me.
Swung me back in the other direction, Pat.
Okay.
Let's have a motion.
What I just said was a motion. Do we have to have a motion? Then it would have to include, a motion would have
Oh,
to
yeah,
include
I
the
guess,
conflict of
you
interest
Can
stuff too.
piecemeal it as you started to do.
Okay. So I
Deal with them and
I move,
And we're also okay with the purple and orange amendments as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
That's all going in
Yeah.
together with
Yeah. Okay.
this motion.
So I move to, what are we doing here? I move to amend the bylaws of the Lexington Planning Commission. And then how do we say this? Under section 2 purpose, subsection A, the change from chapter 22 to chapter 360. And with the addition of the clause of, and with regard to applications for amendments to the existing ordinance. And under B, the change of chapter 28 to chapter 420 and the addition of a clause and amendments to the existing ordinance. And under subsection C, the change of the number of section 2-71 to section 10-7 and the addition of a sentence after the first sentence, make recommendations to city council on revisions, updates, and adoption of the comprehensive plan in accordance with section 10-7. And also amendment under Article 4, Section 1, subsection E of the conflict of interest as presented. And amendment to the clause or the subsection 8 regarding parliamentary procedure as presented to the commission. Good.
Second.
That was good. That was good.
Thank you, Pat.
Further discussion?
Well, let me, should we also have, and with regard to amendments? Because you didn't say with regard to under in B, just to make it consistent, because we did the with regard to. amendments.
That's different because in B, we are allowed to come up with those amendments ourselves.
Okay,
Or
okay,
propose those,
thank you,
right?
thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, okay. Great, thank you.
Okay, a motion and a second. Do we? Let's just take a vote. All in favor? Aye. All right, that sounded really good, and I
The longest motion ever.
yeah, thank you. I
I'm gonna
appreciate
cross this, that, and put it in. a-
appreciate the discussion,
Thank
everybody.
you all for, thank you all for considering that.
Um,
Now what? We're exhausted.
Arnie, like, is there like a 2-minute thing we can just knock out on ADUs, or should we table this for another time? I feel like we're
I was gonna
what's
ask you that.
temperaments, how is our temperament? My temperament's kind of like ready to
More temper than mint.
hey.
We're willing to move on. We can certainly skip that and come back. And pick
Yeah,
that
what,
up at the next
uh,
meeting.
In related to this, so do we have anything on our docket for the next meeting, or will we probably spend it all on that anyway, ADUs?
This time, we do not have any applications that are coming to my foggy brain at this moment, so it could be all ADU.
I will say about the next meeting, if this is an appropriate time, that I will not be here on the May 25th meeting. Because we got high school graduation I have to attend.
The slacker.
What, Arnie, what is the next meeting? We're still continuing. We're not reading the final, right? We have the nonconformities.
You have
Mhm.
nonconformities, a couple little ancillary things at the very end. We've already put this into ordinance format. We didn't want to present that to you yet because you're used to seeing it
Right.
here. So let's finish up with the last couple of little items. Well, actually, nonconformities is not little, but finish up with those. We also provide you with an appendix just to show you a couple of examples, particularly for nonconformities. So if we can move through that, and then we can provide you with some more ordinance related format, which will be a rough draft or your first draft truly of the whole code put together. And then we can move on from there.
So if that's the case, we could live without Pat for that discussion. I'm joking aside, it means that we would have you for the full
Mhm.
review of the
Yeah, I'll come
full
back.
ordinance. That's what I'm getting at.
If I'm in town, I'll be
So-
there.
I'll make a motion to table under new business, item C, until the next meeting of the planning commission on May 25th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay, thank you all. Let's move on to items of other business. So we had,
I'm sorry. Not for you.
Before we jump into zoning and planning report, I think Arnie, did you want to talk about the item that was the other item that we had emailed this morning about in other business, or do you want to wait for another meeting to discuss that?
I can wait, but I also can do that quickly.
Okay. Arnie has an item in other business that we'll add right before we hit talking about planning commission composition. Go ahead, Arnie.
So we don't have to do an amendment to the agenda. I'm just going to fold it into my zoning report if that's.
Oh, okay. Well, then we'll
Save you a motion.
let's do zoning report then.
Worked with a kayak rental company that was approved for Jordan's Point Park on a couple of locations for signs. They're more directional signs. One's a little bit bigger, has a little bit of information on it. So you may soon see a couple of signs. I believe there's a ribbon cutting today, if I'm not mistaken, for that particular company for Bither Outdoor. Entered an agreement with the city to do some kayak rentals and I think a couple of other rental things, but I can't remember what they are. So you may see that operator in George Point Park soon.
Are they actually going to have a structure, like a storage structure or anything like that? Or
Not to my understanding, no. They're not providing anything. We're not providing anything. I think it's going to be more of a trailer, kayaks, maybe electric bikes, if I remember correctly. And then there was some question of food handling or service at some point, but I'm not sure where that ended up. So don't be disappointed if you go there and there's no food service and you thought Arnie said food service.
Okay.
Attended a Central Shenandoah Planning District meeting regarding the regional application for electric vehicle charging station grant. There's currently grants a very short time frame. It's actually at the end of the month. We've been waiting for this for the federal money, but the guidelines for the actual grants have not been forthcoming until recently. There have been a number of jurisdictions in the PDC that have expressed interest in that. So they are planning on doing a regional application. So there will be probably 5 or 6 jurisdictions in on that application for electric vehicle charging stations. I still need to get a letter of support out of the city manager by next Tuesday, which is our cutoff date to be part of that process. And then we'll be coming back to council after that to get a more formal letter for the actual application for that grant. And there will also be 3 more years of this cycle. So even if we're unlucky in the first round, there's at least 2, if not 3 more years of this cycle for CFI, which is some sort of charging infrastructure grant. Earlier today, attended a meeting with the Public Works, and one of their consultants that they have on call is going to help us out with a TAP grant, and that's a transportation alternatives. That's the opposite cycle with Smart Scale. And it has to deal with bike ped improvements. So we're trying to figure out, there seems to be interest in at least 3 different segments of our bike ped plan. The one that I mentioned to you before that goes down Waddell, ends up going to Houston Street, going down Miller, and then going into the backside of the Don Tequila Shopping Center. That's not the name of the shopping center, but you know what I mean. So we're trying to figure out that a link down South Main Street, which I think is the 4th priority. And then there's been some interest in going down Thornhill Road as well. So we don't know at this time that's going to be one application with all of those or 3 different applications or how it's going to be broken down. And that's all I have for at least actually, no, it's not all I have for a zoning report. I would like for you all to consider setting a policy for items when they come in, because when they come in too late, then it really doesn't give staff or opportunity to review them. And that was obvious earlier, but also doesn't give you all the opportunity to truly review it. So I don't know if it's worthwhile, but I would recommend you at least consider setting a deadline. If it's today at noon, the day of the meeting, if it's the day before at noon or the day before that at 4 p.m. or just some scheduled time that if items come in before that, we will forward those to you. But that folks that submit after that, there would not be an expectation that it would come to you, that they would have to show up if it's a member of the public and present what it is that they've submitted.
I think,
Council has something like that,
what do they have? What does council do?
4 o'clock the day of the meeting, but they also have some time between the work day and when they start their meeting. So I would not recommend 4 o'clock the day of your meeting, maybe a little bit earlier, at least the day before that.
I think even on Tuesday has been my experience. If it doesn't come in by Tuesday, sometimes I can have a hard time reading it before the meeting.
I
Yeah.
think that there's two types I would, and Arnie admonished me this morning because of my late sending in. And so it occurred to me going back that when we were doing the comprehensive plan, we actually came up with a practice of Tuesday, that we would send any comments in on Tuesday. And that was because we were doing a regular review. And in this case, you know, my suggestions, that would have given Arnie and Kate more time if I did it by Tuesday. So personally, I will go back to reviewing the agenda on Monday, and then if I have comments, to get them in by Tuesday. But in regards to public comments, it's much better if it does come to you the day before, because then you can send it out to us. I mean, when someone hands us something at the planning commission meeting, it really isn't that helpful for them, you know, to get their point of view across. So I don't know how we can do that, but as a practice, from commissioner's point of view, I think if we have comments on the agenda or the text or whatever, then it's on us to try to get it in by Tuesday, to give everybody a chance.
Does that work for you too? Tuesday, is that good for?
I could be specific and say 4 o'clock on Tuesday. That
Yeah.
way, if it comes in by 4,
You have it for the day.
or that
Yeah.
at least allows us some time to get it to you. So you have Tuesday night. Otherwise, we may lose Tuesday night for review.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah, I mean,
Sounds good.
whatever works.
What
I
about,
think
what about what Tom, for example, Tom's example today, what would that fall under?
Right now, it sounds like we've only made a decision or determination on council submitted items. And unless you provide something else, I would just tack on the same sort of
Okay.
deadline for submittals. And I would just add a little bit in that if it's a letter like Mr. Rappold provided, which is fairly easy and quick to digest, that's significantly different than 6 or 7 pages.
Yep.
And either that needs to come in earlier so you really have time, or the person just has to provide that in the time that's allotted during the public meeting or the public comment portion of the public hearing. Now, also, neither one of these, you could always, it's not as though you only have 3 minutes at that meeting and that's the only opportunity you get. The bylaws, for an example, or the other one, you always have more time. So if you needed more time and you got a lot of public comment, you could go to another meeting. So it's not like it's all or nothing as far as timing goes.
So I think in terms of public comments coming to you, I would just think if you can get them to us before the meeting or at the meeting, give them to us. We'll deal with them as we can. And if you can, if you know something comes into you at whatever 3 o'clock on Thursday, you can't get to us and you can't get to it. That's kind of up to your discretion in terms of your workflow.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that staff just wants to know that they don't have to guarantee that
Right.
they're going to
Yeah.
be distributing electronically any materials submitted
Yeah.
after
Right.
Tuesday, 4 p.m. That
From
they
us,
can't,
yeah.
if they can get to it, that's fine, but
Yeah.
it's not
Right.
going to be required
Yeah.
by staff.
We're happy to make the copies and have it for you here, certainly, as we did today. But it's just maybe we've been a little bit too lax and have enabled this over a period of time, and people are submitting significant amounts of material the day of. And I just don't think that overall that's fair to you. Most of you have things to do during the day. I'm sure that you all haven't set aside specific time to review late submittals just in preparation of the meeting.
Yeah, I'll say that I appreciate all public input and comment and don't want to discourage anybody from bringing anything to planning commission because they feel like they missed a deadline, but we should just state that there's not a guarantee that we'll have time to look at it unless it's submitted by Tuesday, 4 p.m. before the upcoming meeting. But yeah,
Does this require any kind of official, or is this just, you'll put it out on the website or
Do
something?
that, we can put a notice out. This is just sort of internal policy. This doesn't have to get added necessarily or voted on. Just wanted some direction. Thank you for that.
And is the reverse true? That we've sometimes received things from staff at meeting. Would it be beneficial to have some of those come before us? If you wanted to send something out to us in addition to the packet so if you've done the packet on Friday and you thought of something else you want to add, is there a time that,
Yeah, we can certainly abide by the same thing. Perhaps a good example is the good work that Kate did with looking at the lot width from other jurisdictions. We handed that to you,
The
or
day of the
provided that the day of.
right?
And in that case, we'll just hold it till the meeting and provide it to you.
Right. And also they're here at the meeting to explain.
Right. that's
Like,
the
like
big
we
difference.
said, if people submit stuff late and they come to the meeting and explain it, then we can get it. So they get put that in front of us and you always walk us through whatever you give to us. So I would say you give us what you have whenever you want to. Yeah.
Well, especially,
Clarity is
Yeah.
that the policy that if we have something, we don't necessarily have to hold it, we can provide it.
I would say yes.
yes.
Yeah. Cause then, and then
A
we,
little bit different than the public. but-
yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that's fine. I think it's okay to be.
No,
different
it's
public.
fine. I guess what I'm saying is in this particular case, Arnie, on the bylaws, it's because I sat down and really read them yesterday that I came up with that notion. I couldn't have done it by Tuesday. Now I'm going to have to change my habit and read this on Monday. So if I do have something that needs research, then I can send it to you by Tuesday afternoon. But in practice, the sooner any of us can receive something in addition to what's normally in the packet, the better for consideration.
I think I agree with everything that's been said. I'm trying to think about what happens when you have a public hearing where people do send stuff up right to the last minute. It's nothing that you do, but can we, I guess, if you go to the website, you're just gonna make the statement that if you don't get it in by 12, that we're not necessarily gonna read it, but you'll still provide it to us?
Correct. In other words, there'll be that Tuesday, 4 o'clock, as I'm understanding the direction now. Tuesday, 4 o'clock is a deadline.
Mm.
If it comes in 4:30 on a Tuesday or anytime thereafter, then it's not guaranteed to be sent and should not be expected that it's going to be forwarded to the planning commission. We can make copies and have enough copies for you once you get here. But folks also have the opportunity to show up
Right.
and provide their comments. So just getting it in early is a courtesy so that you have time to review. So to give you sufficient time, that's why we're doing the deadline.
No, I just want to make sure, so what's going to be included in the public record, if somebody sends something in at 4:30 and doesn't show up at the meeting, at the public hearing, does that mean that letter doesn't get into the minutes of the meeting?
We're certainly not committing to reading something that somebody submits, because I think council has gone down that road and changed that particular tactic. So if you submit something and you cannot, after the time period, you cannot expect staff to read that into the record. So I'll say that at a minimum.
Okay, can you summarize what you think?
I feel like Tuesday at 4 o'clock.
Tuesday, 4 o'clock from us to them,
Right.
and 4 o'clock also for public comment
On,
yeah.
for public comment on 4 o'clock
on
on,
Tuesday.
For them to send it
For
to
them
us.
to-
to send it out.
A-
Okay.
And if they can't make it, then they need to be here
Yeah.
in person and present it. And that's
Yeah.
perfectly fine. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that.
And
And if- yeah.
I've told people that want to comment, so I say, just send it in earlier than, if you
Yeah.
want us to read it
Mhm.
thoughtfully, send it in ahead of time.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you all for that discussion. Let's move on to the other item of new business that we want to talk about, which is to have a very short look forward at the composition of planning commission that will be, and the possible and definitive turnover that is going to happen in the summer.
Mhm.
I will be, I I'm not sure if my term ends June or July. End of July. Okay. So that will be my last meeting of the second meeting of July. And I've already decided I'm not going to be asked to be reappointed.
Hugh.
What?
Hugh. That's Latin for alas.
And so that's all I wanted to say personally. I can't speak for anybody else.
Are there any other terms, people whose terms are up?
Matt.
Maddie?
Matt, is your term up?
It's my turn. No comment at this point.
Yeah, you don't need to, right? Yeah, no one needs to.
Need to
Yeah.
say a thing.
You don't need to, no. But your term, right? So your term, so you'll either be you or someone new, right? And so definitely have to get someone new for
So-
Blake after July.
What is the point of this discussion besides identifying? I mean, because we know we're gonna have to be filling, but is this point of this discussion to consider? Why is this being brought up?
Right now, we have a very experienced planning commission. And if we're going to have turnover, it takes a long time to find people to step into the role. It's succession planning in an informal way is the only reason I brought it up. Because to be frank, if we lose you and Blake in July, that's a deep loss for the commission in terms of a long history and knowledge and experience. And so there's nothing we can do but go out and try it, we as commissioners to go and talk to friends and say, would you be interested? And here's the quality, here's what you are committing to. So the city has put an advertisement in the paper. But again, we know that, that doesn't always necessarily yield. It's usually word of mouth where somebody who you think would be a good candidate. And if you can interest them in applying, then they would go through the process between the mayor nominating them and the council deciding. But at least you have people in the queue, because right now the lead time to get people in is a long time.
So is Gladys appointed for the remainder of Nick Betts's term?
I don't recall.
Because I saw that it was 24, right? So,
Yes, yeah, I think you're right.
right. And so I guess that's an option, right? When you have could she have been appointed for, because I remember when I was initially came on, I was for the last 3 months of Pat Mayor check. So was there the option to put me on permanent, like put me on a full term then? Is that how?
There would have been another seat open potentially, but if that's the only one, then you just filling its term.
It's so that the term is the seat and not the person.
Right.
Got
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Okay,
correct.
right. And so are yours as to whatever Jamie's would have been, right?
Well,
Yeah.
We have a spreadsheet somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, no, but I think that's right. Okay.
Spreadsheet.
All
Pat,
right.
you're up next year.
24.
I'm up the year after that.
Yeah.
I don't intend to continue. I think many people will be glad not to have.
Hey, Hugh.
But the point is, I don't think I, should be continuing after that. We'll see what happens. I'll say no comment. But we all take it seriously. I think excuse me if I'm being proactive or pushy on it, but I think to get good people on the commission takes effort and thinking ahead. That's all.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. When you read the bylaws and it says that, it's city council's role is to appoint. And I don't know to what extent they are actively recruiting, other than putting paper. So we can do it too, but ultimately the buck falls on the city council.
The way I described it, I think is the way it's been happening. Informal discussions by commissioners with people who you think would be interested and could be a good fit. Then they make a decision and then it goes through the process of the mayor nominating and the council approving.
Certainly, if you find anybody that's interested, we have a generic boards, commissions, something or other application online that you all probably are familiar with or maybe don't remember filling out, but just direct them to our website. And if they can't find it, because some of those things are hidden, just direct them to me and I will make sure that they have that link.
And it's good to look at skill sets, what we need, someone business minded, a variety of ages and sexes and demographics and even differing opinions. So keep that in mind as you try to recruit people.
Yeah, we get out of here in a lot shorter time if we all agree.
Got everyone to agree.
We could all be drinking a heliotrope much sooner.
All right.
I'm just kidding. That was a joke, obviously.
I'll see you there.
Okay. Key annual PC milestones, major project updates, anything new to report on that front? No? Okay. Leslie, city council report?
No real report. We met last Thursday and I guess passing the budget was our biggest item, that and the capital improvement plan. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you. And the last item. Do
I
we
move
want?
to adjourn.
Second.
So moved. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We'll miss you next time, Pat.